associated with this. I can envision a scenario where you would have multiple agencies which could lend their expertise, so there would not be a need to burden EHD.
But Dr. Clark, you don't know that right now, do you? Because you haven't talked to the county about their available personnel, have you?
No, I haven't, and that wasn't my charge.
Now, to determine whether a rule is having the desired effect, there also has to be analysis of change. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would there need to be additional types of employees to perform that analysis?
No, I can envision the same employees assessing that over time.
So public health workers assessing if there's been any change in public health in the areas?
Right, they're the experts on public health in the area, so consulting with them, are we seeing a decrement in, say, one of the social determinants, ER admission rates? Have they changed over time? And do we update this in our database?
Now, I think that you were asked about the rule outlining the timelines for a HIA application. Do you recall that line of questioning?
I do.
Okay, so since the rule does not provide any specific timelines, can you give us, in your impression as the technical drafter of this rule, about how long it would take an average entity to go through step by step by step to actually receive a HIA permit? How long will it take?
No, I can't. So I don't, that was not the charge that I had in this. So that would be outside my expertise.
You've also talked a few times about, and I quote, news sources. And in response to questioning by NTES, you said, well, there could be news sources that are moved to different communities to balance out effects. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Do you understand that new sources are not the same as new facilities?
Yes, I understand that.
So then it is not always feasible that a new source could be moved in another place if the facility exists in the current location.
Under your hypothetical, I can see where you're going with that. The intent of this, we have to keep coming back to this, is that it's redistribution of the emission sources.
So again, my question was, so your answer would be, that's correct, that you can have a new source, an existing facility, and that facility just can't be moved to a new location. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. I believe the city of Albuquerque HD has left the building. I'm not sure if they're online. So no response. Does Mr. Willard, are there any questions from Kirtland?
No, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Ms. Dafke from U.S. Air Force?
Nothing additional, sir.
Ms. Letta Pueblo?
No questions from the Pueblo, Ms. Letta.
All right, and Ms. Semino, I believe she's probably online. I'm going to assume that she has no questions at this time. I'm going to allow for a very, very short redirect, and this will go for all parties concerning redirect. I'll give you 10 minutes for redirect, and that's going to be it. And like I said, that's going to go for all parties regarding redirect of their witnesses.
Great. Hey, Dr. Clark, you hanging in there?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Just briefly, let's see, and these will be a little bit chaotic just because the cross exam was a little bit all over the place. But in terms of modeling for Part 41, is it your opinion that the modeling that's already required for Part 41 achieves the same objectives as the modeling required for the HEEI?
So the modeling is generally in the same kind of format. All we're asking for is some specifics along the way, improving the spacing along this to improve the resolution of what the impacts are within the community, and doing the speciation so that we have an accurate calculation of what each emission source will provide to each receptor along the way. And that is not a difficult task, and it improves the analysis significantly.
And Dr. Clark, when you're determining cancer risk, does it matter whether the source is there next to a person for 70 years?
No, it's the same standard format.
And we talked a little bit about the existing enforcement and monitoring requirements with the Environmental Health Department. Just, can you tell us, in the absence of enforcement, say due to staffing issues or lack of follow through by the department, what would happen in an overburdened community?
Generally, what's going to happen is until a source is monitored or we have actual on-ground data showing what the concentrations are within a community, you would be assuming that the emissions are reaching them and the health impacts are accumulating.
And Dr. Clark, do the data exist to do an analysis of emissions impacts specific to all permitted facilities existing in Bernalillo County?
I have not seen a database of that information. Once that's compiled, then maybe, I mean, this is essentially what Air Tox Screen had done, was to take the reported emissions and put them into a model and then assess the relative impacts along the way. It would be great if the county were able to do that.
And Dr. Clark, is the pulmonary system of a human being in Los Angeles the same as the pulmonary system of a human being in Albuquerque?
Despite what people say, yes, it is.
Is the health response to air pollution generally the same for someone in an overburdened community across the country?
Yes, with small caveat, it really depends on the pollutants that are impacting them. But generally, for an overburdened community, they have excessive amounts of air pollutants in their environment.
One last question, Dr. Clark. In your rebuttal testimony, I think it's docket number 205 on page 27, you provided a chart that has the county average in Bernalillo County for each of the 5 environmental risk hazards required for consideration by the rule. And you noted that in any overburdened community that would meet or, sorry, let me start over. You noted that for any overburdened community identified under the rule, it would meet or exceed at least one of those county averages listed in that chart, right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to whether any increase in criteria pollutants or HAPs would injure human health in a community that exceeds one of these baseline levels?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered previously.
I'm
Is
gonna
not
sus-
redirect.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think he's already formed that opinion.
Okay, I have nothing further for you, Dr. Clark. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping that
Thank
brief. Dr. Clark, I believe Board Member Galuski has one follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a couple of quick technical questions aimed at trying to understand how to make the meteorological components to broaden some of the options. For running AirMod, it's been described that you can use National Weather Service data from the airport. You've also discussed the possibility of collecting local in situ data. Are you aware of the ability to run AirMod with output from prognostic models like the Weather Research and Forecast model?
I have not evaluated that. I think that is a possibility. Essentially, it's a static system of just a time period and a wind direction and a few other calculations, the MO values associated with it. We're looking at something particularly from a stack along the way. So I believe there could be an opportunity to do that. It's not typically done. It is the value of the 5-year data is that you've got a range of already measured meteorological conditions, which should be representative of what would be going on in the future. Now, if there was evidence of some significant change that is being anticipated, then maybe the prognostic would be useful along that way. That may also be a question for Dr. Bilsbeck.
Billsback, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. Yeah. So You definitely can run air mod with warp.
Hold on,
Objection.
hold on just one moment.
Yeah.
We've got a
The
construction.
vacuum. I think it's their vacuuming outside.
Dr. Billsback.
Yes, the short answer is you can run AirMod with WARF, and there's a publicly available preprocessor to prepare the meteorology for use with AirMod.
And along the same lines. could s-
Hold
oh,
on
sorry,
just one
sorry.
moment. I think they're trying to get the vacuum cleaner stopped.
Oh, you want to go in there and tell them?
If they're outside.
They stopped vacuuming.
Okay, you can follow up.
Okay. So we said that weather research forecast model simulations could be used. Could reanalysis data be used as well?
I believe so. I think that one of the challenges is just making sure that the outputs, the reanalysis product maps onto the AirMod inputs. And so I think there's WARF is sort of widely used for AirMod, and I'd have to look more specifically at the other reanalysis projects, but I know that's something that's come up for us in trying to use reanalysis data as opposed to WARF or on the ground data.
I mostly just wanted to flag that as some possible ways of expanding the options for how AirMod is driven. And then also for the Met station data that one could, it sounds like applicants could either use data from the airport or under some circumstances, if it's too far away from the airport, which is a qualitative thing and maybe even hard to assess, they may need to deploy their own meteorological instrumentation. How extensive does that instrumentation need to be? Does it need to be like the gold standard, full EPA standard Met station, or can something less expensive be used to get the key parameters?
In my opinion, doesn't necessarily need to be gold standard, but it needs to be reliable and reproducible along the way. And it's actually the frequency within the measurements, which are important, so that we do have an understanding of what the gusts might be doing along the way. Most of this is being driven by wind direction and wind speed. And if there are periods of high flow over a short period of time, if the measurements are spaced too far apart, we're going to miss that component. And especially for let's use an example of like we brought up a pug mill earlier on. A pug mill without emission controls, we would expect a certain radius of influence related to the emissions from that site. But if you have an extra gusty day along the way, then the actual radius of influence may be further along the way. So I believe there's a balancing act between that. And I'm not sure if Dr. Billsback has a comment related specifically to that, but I think there's some guidance from EPA in Chapter W or Part W. There's a listing kind of to assist in that.
Dr. Billsback, do you have a response to that?
I just agree with the statement that I don't think it would be overly complex to collect the data, at least for the surface data. And then I think the guidelines around the upper air data are more flexible in terms of distance away from the source, at least in like AirMod guidance.
That sounds about right. So users would not be, applicants would not be expected to launch their own weather balloons, for example, clearly.
No.
That's fine. So, I mean, I'm flagging this to see as we consider the meteorological components, how to maybe expand that to make it, to give more flexibility. In the discussion of mitigated versus unmitigated modeling, it's been established that once you get the configuration of AirMod set up for doing the either scenario, running the model again to do the alternate scenario is not that much extra work. Is that correct? It's just changing
Correct.
a couple of
It's
numbers.
essentially changing a couple of a source term. If you run it as a whole species, just do VOCs or total organics or whatever you're going to run it as along the way. So no, it is not a difficult endeavor.
Yeah, that's fine. And that's my understanding as well. But I also just wanted to ask, aren't these, if you're only modifying the emissions, I guess it's a technical question, but aren't these models, aren't the results of these Gaussian plume models mostly linear in the sense that if you cut the emissions in half, the resulting plume will have concentrations that are about half? The question being, is it even really necessary to run the full air mod for both scenarios?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, that's absolutely right. We've verified that before, and so essentially you can just multiply by a factor rather than needing to rerun the model.
Right. I think that's an important point because that also may help to streamline the process for folks. Great, thanks. That's all I have.
Any further follow-up by the board? All right, I see no one else. Dr. Billsback, thank you for hanging in there this morning. Both you and Dr. Clark are excused.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, it's 12:45. We'll take a 45-minute break. We'll resume at 1:30.
Yeah, it's not too late to add. Antoinette, what kind?